you just fine.
Okay.
All right, we're live. Let me know if you guys can hear me okay. Hello, hello. All right, they can hear me. Ed, see if they can hear you.
Can anyone hear me now?
Yep, they hear you, Ed.
Cool.
So I don't know why my audio is so quiet for you.
Yeah, I don't know. Because literally anything else I use volume-wise on my phone right now. So when I exited out a couple times, I checked my Pandora and stuff, and it played perfectly fine, and I could hear it fine. But I have like so. Forgive me, everyone. I'm gonna have my nose like a couple inches away from my phone so that I can hear Brandon. But I have to really concentrate to hear you.
Huh. All right. Well, I guess we can get into it
Okay,
as long
sure.
as we can as long as we can make this work.
Sure.
So yeah, thanks guys for coming. I wanted to hit on this topic with Ed just because of his vast knowledge of this species of fish, his time in the hobby. He knows what he's doing. And I want this to kind of be a resource, I guess, that people can kind of look back on should they need to, and get a general breakdown of, I guess, the Goodeid species as a whole. There's not a lot of information out there about them readily available, so I felt that this was a kind of a good subject to hit. Ed, why don't you give us a brief history of yourself? I guess, I mean, however you want to go about it. If you want to do just your experience in the hobby and working with Goodeid, or if you want to get more involved with that, with how you got into the hobby, however you want to do it.
Well, I think a lot of the folks that are already on this stream have heard this, but basically, I've literally been taking care of my own fish since I was 5 years old. And I'm 4, so we're going to be hitting 50 years. There were a few years there that I only maybe had one aquarium, but I've always had fish. I had my own store in the 90s, and then I've bred here and there, here and there. And then about 5 years ago, when COVID hit and all of us were on that big, long hiatus break where we couldn't go anywhere, I was watching YouTube one night and came across a video of Greg Sage and saw some Goodeids, and I was hooked. And now my fish room is predominantly Goodeids and critically endangered fish. And I have a fish room of 110 aquariums right now, and I ship critically endangered fish all over the continental United States.
All right. So I got to know Ed kind of through YouTube as well. It was one day I believe I was in one of Jeff's streams, and he popped up doing a
It was the
tour.
very first stream I ever did, and Jeff had been asking me for about a month or so. I was really hesitant, and did that stream. We were on for like 2 hours. And it was just me doing a rough tour of the fish room and stuff. And I met quite a few good people from that stream. And you happen to be one of them. And you and Kyle have me now where I'm producing my own stuff. I'm feeling more comfortable. So I bred parrots for many years. I'm a certified avian specialist. And I used to teach seminars all over the country for the American Federation of Aviculture. I had a bad situation happen to me one night, which I won't get in depth with that. And I kind of shied away from speaking and stuff. And I kind of wanted to just enjoy my hobby and stuff like that. But I'm starting to get started to get bit by the YouTube bug. And I'm just testing it out just to see. I'm still a little uncomfortable, but it's getting better.
Yeah, no, I feel like I'm kind of there with you. I've been up on a lot of streams and stuff like that, but streaming with Kyle, but this is like really my first kind of solo, live stream.
It's gonna be cool. Fine.
Yeah. All right, Ed.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
go ahead.
Go ahead. You're fine.
Oh, I was gonna say, if you want to give us just a quick intro of the goodeid species, I guess, just like a general overview, like where these fish came from, kind of their general habitat, maybe why they're at risk, and kind of the history of the species in the hobby.
Sure. So there are approximately I have count 42 different species of goodeids. Of those 42, one is completely extinct. It can no longer be brought back. Many others are critically endangered. 2 were extinct in the wild, and over the last 5 to 6 years have been reintroduced back into the wild and are doing well. And there's a handful of them at this point that are considered of least concern with the International Union of the Conservation of Nature. These fish come from central Mexico. They come from fast-flowing waters and tributaries, and then some of them are actually in slow-moving small bodies of water. But most of these fish come from micro-endemic areas. Some of these locations and species of fish come from a small body of water that could be the size of your living room. So that's why it's so important to understand the significance of maintaining these fish. Right now, Mexico has been in a drought for well over a year, and just in the last year, quite a few of these waterways are drying out. I'll use Amica splendens. A lot of people may know Amica splendens, the butterfly goodeid, which is a very popular fish in the hobby. They're down to 2 locations, and the one location they actually use as a swimming hole, dammed up as a swimming hole, and the villagers swim right with the fish. Another thing that attributes to these fish is, like I said, the microendemic climates, invasive species, drought, pollution. Right now in Mexico, farming is very big there, and they get a lot of runoff and things of that nature. But a lot of the issue is the introduction to invasive species that have caused issues, and then just the pollution. So part of the programs that CARES and shoals and all those work with is not just preserving these fish, but also bringing these waterways back to a healthier state, which in turn is also going to help the villagers of the areas, so that they have fresh drinking water and a better climate around them.
So is that kind of part of the reason why these waterways are drying up? I mean, yeah, there's a drought, but is it because of a population increase and the need for water?
So it's a combination of drought, and then from the farming, so much water they're using for farming, and then also runoff from all of that. But it was brought to my attention by Jorge that some of the chemicals that the farmers are using, they're being strong-armed into using. So it's an outside source that has a little bit of pull that's encouraging them to use these pesticides and things. And these are causing runoff into the water and causing issues too. But just in the last year, a couple waterways that were large volumes of water are now either mud holes, literally mud, or just completely dried out. So whether you want to call it climate change, whatever you want to do, there's a lot of issues with drought, and it's been going on for well over 15 months.
Okay. And I guess when did people start being aware, I guess, of the Goodeids and the the declines and the push to have them in the aquarium hobby?
So what's interesting is a lot of these fish have only been discovered in the 80s and 90s, so they haven't been well known for too long. Some of the first fish that they noticed that there was an issue was Scyphia francese, where Dr. Miller had discovered them. I believe it was 1974 or 75. I have to check my notes, so please don't hold me. It's about around that area. Dr. Miller went back 2 years later. They were completely gone, totally gone from the ecosystem. Um, and so that sparked an interest. And then over in the 80s and in the 90s, a few more were discovered, and it was the same situation every time. And every time researchers were going back, they were seeing the numbers dwindle and things of that nature. So what started happening, these researchers were bringing these fish back in small numbers and working with them in labs. And some of them have been shared with hobbyists now. And because of that being shared with the hobbyists, two species in the last 2 years have successfully been reintroduced back into the wild that were extinct, which is Zoogeneticus tequila and Scyphia francese.
Okay. I guess the next topic I'd want to hit on, granted, because like I said, I want this to be a resource for everybody. If they want
Sure.
to come back to, they can. But they're not your aquarium or your general aquarium fish. They have different, I guess, different needs than most fish. So why don't we get into some of the husbandry? Like let's start with basic tank parameters.
Goodeids require a higher pH and some mineralization. So my guys here at a 7.8 with a 300 TDS, they need very clean water and high oxygen. So I know some people don't do very many water changes. What I would recommend if you're going to work with Goodeids, definitely monitor your water parameters. These fish don't tolerate ammonia and high nitrate well. So as long as you're maintaining those parameters. The one thing that I will highly suggest is they have to have air. They have to have aeration. If they're not getting enough aeration, they start going to respiratory issues, their colorations fade out, and they just have they have like a failure to thrive kind of. So when I built this fish room a couple years ago, at the time I didn't have my commercial air pump that I was using that runs the whole fish room now. And at that time, some of my Scyphia weren't showing their best, and I was losing some. And so what I found is that by having better water movement and higher aeration, they do a lot better. And my breeding has been doing a lot better. So you'll get a kick out of this. So before I got the commercial pump, I was running 38 Paul Fly 4-way pumps in my fish room. And they were causing some air, but not turbulent enough to saturate the water to a higher oxygen content that they needed. And then, like I said, they don't tolerate high nitrates and ammonia, so you really want to keep that water quality. I have a breeding facility, so for me, I have large numbers of fish in a tank, so I'm doing water changes at minimum once a week, sometimes twice a week, but that's because some of my tanks, I have 75 fish in, so where I'm rearing babies. So the key to the husbandry is making sure they have high oxygenated water and good quality water. High pH, I do 7-8. Some people feel over an 8.0 could be a little stressful for them. And then decent TDS, mine's at 300 right now. So, and that seems to be the sweet spot for me because I'm actually breeding some species of Goodeids that many other people have difficulty breeding. So, I'm very fortunate here. The Crocodons do very well for me. And there's quite a few people throughout the country that are reporting that they don't breed for them at all. And I think I've just got a real good sweet spot here with my water conditions.
Okay. We got a question in the chat from Boots. I don't know if you can read that, but I'll read it for
I
you.
can't. I've got a phone this big. I'm old. I can't see. So if you can help me
Okay.
out, I'll appreciate it.
Yeah. It says, are all goodeid prolific? It seems like the doederi population in the hobby has exploded.
Well, it's funny that someone would mention that, and maybe we'll get into that in a little while about within the hobby. General rule of thumb: goodeids they're live-bearing fish, but they're not like a guppy that can have 30 plus babies. On average, goodeids have 10 to 15 babies. I have some bloodlines of fish here in my fish room that every so often will give me 30 babies, but that's very rare that happens. So they're not that prolific of a fish, and that's another reason why it's so important for us to conserve these fish, is because you sit back and think about it. You have all these invasive species in the wild, and if a female's only dropping 10 to 15 babies, how many babies are surviving with all the invasive species? So yeah, so the so-called market seems to be flooded with the Eisenai complex, which is Xenotoca eisenai, Xenotoca doadrioi, and Xenotoca lion's eye. But we may talk about. I have an opinion about that within the hobby, and I'll explain that because I'm sure we're going to discuss this. But as a general rule of thumb, they're not prolific like other live bearers. Another thing with goodeids is where some live-bearing fish, such as a lot of the placiliids, can hold sperm and don't have to be in contact with the male for months, and the female can impregnate herself. Goodeids have to have contact with the male for each pregnancy.
Okay. I guess now I lost track of where we were at. We were on general husbandry. So what kind of, like, if I guess if you were to set up a tank as far as what's in it, what would be a general, setup tank wise, like decor or plants or?
So now, like I said, I breed. So a setup for breeding is totally different. But a basic setup, I would recommend nothing smaller than 20 gallons, especially if you're just starting out with goodeids. I have the personal opinion that a larger body of water is easier to maintain than a smaller. However, I do have some species here that I'm working on right now and boosting them up for breeding, that I'm conditioning them in 10 gallons, but you really have to watch those with the water. I'd recommend a 20. 29 would be best, and then you could start a small colony from there. Thing to remember with water temperature with goodeids, there are only 2 species of goodeids that can withstand higher water temperatures, but most goodeids should be kept at no higher than 74 degrees. Plants, some of them will nip at plants, but as a general rule of thumb, they're not like cichlids that will rip plants apart. I do a lot of Anubias. I do val. I do jungle val. I do Italian val. Some of the stem plants do well, and they don't really bother them that much. And it's also going to help cut down your nitrates. But also, as your females are having babies, those babies, you want to have some. If you're going to allow the female to drop in the tank with the colony, I have some species that I do that with. You want to have some plants where those babies have some cover.
As far as substrate, what is there a preference? Sand, gravel? Doesn't really matter.
So again, I have a breeding program, so I can appreciate people that do dirted tanks and stuff, but I use medium-sized pea gravel, and the reason I use pea gravel is because it's round, and you get more aeration through the gravel bed with it. I do about a quarter to a half inch deep, and it's easier for me to maintain. I use that for more beneficial bacteria on the bottom. As for my plants, I put them in pots, and the reason I put them in pots is so that I can move around. And so I have to gravel back here every week. I realize to some people that may sound extreme, but like I said, with the volume of fish I'm rearing in tanks, I get a lot of debris, so I have to remove that. And I found by just doing that small bed of gravel, like I said, I do pea gravel, and I vacuum once a week, small amount, and that works for me. Dirted tanks, they may kick up a little bit like a cichlid. I'm 50-50 on that with that. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know of anyone that's maintaining them in a dirted tank, but I'm not saying they couldn't be. The thing that's the most important is just making sure you're maintaining that water quality along with aeration.
Okay. Getting back to the tank temperature, you said it's not advised to keep them above 74 degrees Fahrenheit. How low can they go? How high can they go? And what are some of the effects if you're kind of pushing those limits?
So some of us that work, my friends and I that work with Goodeids, we give them a winter season for a few months where we'll allow that water to drop down to about 65, between 65 and 68, and give them that cooling space. The reason we do that, it mimics their winter in Mexico, and then what it also does, it gives the females the opportunity to regroup and re-strengthen themselves so that they're not perpetually breeding throughout the year. You have to remember, these fish are not like most other live-bearing fish. These are a viviparous fish, which means when the baby forms in this fish, it literally has an umbilical cord that attaches into the female, and they're feeding from the female. So it's not like fish that are incubating eggs in the female. They're literally taking nourishment from the female. So if the female's perpetually breeding all the time, it takes a lot out of them. So we'll do that winter season with them for a few months. So I've seen some people let them go down to as low as 65. I keep mine at the lowest at 68 just because I get a little nervous, but I know people that let them go to 65. The highest we would go is 74. There's a reason why. I'm with a group. I know a lot of people that work with Goodeids from working over the last 6 years. All of us share the data that we have, our experiences and stuff. There are 3 of us in the group that have had people reach out to us with saying, "Hey, we got Goodeids and they're not producing." So we've talked with a couple of theologists, and then just from the data we've collected, and it's a general consensus that Goodeids being kept over 74 degrees for a long period of time will sterilize them. So, and people are like, "Well, wait a minute, I'm sure the water gets warm like that in nature." You have to understand, it'll warm, but then it cools down. In an aquarium, it's going to be constant. If they're kept at that constant temperature, it really takes a lot out on them. And one of the species we've been studying over the last 2 years, and with people sharing data, is the trout goodeid. And I talked to you about this. So just in the last 2 years, I've had numerous people. I've had people, Greg has had people, a couple of the doctors that work with the CARES program have people said, we're doing everything we're supposed to, and our Goodeids are not producing. And we did a little investigating, and what we found, the source they were getting their fish from was keeping their Goodeids at 78 to 80 degrees. So essentially, over a period of time, that will sterilize the fish. So that's why they weren't producing. 2 species that we know of that can withstand warmer temperatures are Xenotoco dowadrii, San Marcos, which we just talked about briefly, and Antinobius toweri, the blue-tailed Goodeiid. But even though they can withstand higher temperatures, I wouldn't let it go constant all the time. These fish flourish better in water temperatures between 70 and 74, but they can do cooler, and we do that cool-off period.
Now I'm guessing the reason they like well-oxygenated water is because they're used to those lower temperatures, colder water, more oxygen.
Exactly.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Well, and so the thing about it, the areas that these fish are in, most of them are being fed by freshwater springs, and these freshwater springs are highly oxygenated because there's a lot of turbulence and movement that's naturally oxygenating the water. Okay, if you so like if you were to put one of these goodeids, say, in a 10-gallon tank without any aeration, within a couple days, you're going to notice something. You're going to notice their colors are going to be fading. You're going to notice that their respirations are going to increase. It's going to stress the fish out. Then, with all of that stress, makes them susceptible to certain diseases. And then, too, they may produce, but it's highly unlikely that they'll produce quality numbers, and you may even have some birth defects. But like I had said, when I first set the fish room I'm in now, I set up 4 years ago. The first year that I had this, like I said, I didn't have my commercial air pump that pumps air to all of my aquariums. I had 38 Paul Fly pumps that were the 4-barrel pumps, and they were pumping water, but the water wasn't getting agitated enough. And that summer, I first started, it got warm, and although I had the room at the time at 75, with the lower turbulence of water and not as much oxygenation, the fish just weren't doing well. So when I got the commercial pump, I saw a world of difference. The fish are active, their colors are better. I'm getting better drops and healthier fish, and they're not stressed, and you're seeing more of their natural behaviors. So just from my experience that I experienced that first year working here, and then what happened that summer, yeah, I can just 100% say they need that high oxygenated water. But like you said too, being with a cooler water fish, the cooler water fish will require more oxygenation.
Yeah, that would definitely be more what they're used to, and it makes sense. So how, I guess, these aren't your traditional live bears.
No.
They breed a different way. We kind of touched base on that a little bit earlier, but why don't we just focus on that aspect of it? I guess,
Okay, so goodeids are sexually dimorphic. That means you can visually look at a male or a female and distinguish them. So most people, I'll use a guppy as an example. Most people know how to tell a guppy. Now, a lot of people want to tell a male by the big fan tail. That's not how you determine them. So there is a pelvic fin in a live bear, right between on the underside, slightly behind the pectorals. It's called the gonopodium. That's the male sex organ. Okay, and the female, her pelvic fin is triangular. So the male's is coned. It's easily to distinguish. In goodeids, a male has his fin is called an andropodium. And the best way to explain it, I'll just show it to you. It looks like a little kid's mitten. So it literally looks like this. And then this part of the andropodium, literally, what will happen, he'll curl this up to make it rigid. And this part will literally insert into the female. The female, hers is more rounded, and the male has an andropodium. So they're sexually dimorphic. As I said earlier, in order for the females to be impregnated, they have to come in contact with the male each time, as opposed to a lot of pasiliads and other live bears that can actually hold sperm for months on end. Goodeids have to have contact with the male in order to get pregnant. Gestation period goes up, generally, most of them is 45 days. Some will go up to 60. They drop the fry live. When the fry are dropped, they will literally have a little umbilical cord called a trophotania. They will carry that for about the first day or two, and then they lose that. And generally, when they first drop their babies, some people get scared. I'm wondering if you noticed this with your Skiffia when they dropped. Did you notice that the babies were laying on the bottom and people are like, they're dead?
Yeah, I was just able to experience that the other day. I had one laying on the ground, and I sat there and I was watching it. I could see it breathing, and you had already told me that. But yeah, if I wouldn't have known, I would have definitely thought that
I've
something was
I've
wrong.
I've had people call me, "Oh my God, Ed, my fish, the babies are born dead." They will lay on the bottom for a while, and sometimes, so I have some crocodons that will lay on the floor for a day or two, and then they go to the surface. So a lot of my fish here, I allow them to colony breed, and then I just pull the babies out. But some of them do predate their babies. So what I do, the ones that I colony breed and allow the females to drop in the tank, I do a lot of floating plants. Guppy grass is my best friend. Something else I do in the tank, and people look at me like I'm crazy. I have no problem with duckweed in my tanks. I just don't do it where it gets so thick and gross that there's no water movement. I will keep a little bit of guppy I totally lost what I was saying. I keep a little bit of it in. I keep a little bit of duckweed in the tank to absorb nitrates and all that. But babies will also go up and hide in it, so it'll protect babies. So what I'll do, I'll keep a little spot somewhere in the tank, so at least I have airflow and all of that. I do guppy grass, any types of floating plants, and just keep an eye. So when the females are ready to drop, and I had to show you this, and now you know what to look for. When the female's about ready to drop, her stomach will square off. And so the ones, sometimes what I'll just do, I'll move them to a 10-gallon tank to drop on their own. And then after they have the babies, I'll remove them out. But there are some fish here that I allow. My doadroi don't even bother their babies. My Mica splendens don't even bother their babies. I just take the babies out. There's some tanks I literally rear the babies for up to 4 weeks in the tank with the parents and have no problem. But there are some that are more that will predate on their babies. Crocodons are one of those ones, it's 50-50. So I generally just pull them because crocodons, which is one of the big programs I'm working with now, I have 12 tanks of different types of crocodons I'm working with. I pull them because the numbers I want to build with them. Babies take baby brine shrimp from day one. And like I said, just keep that water quality going. If you do have babies, those little baby breeder nets that you can get, you don't want to put those babies in a net. Because as you're feeding, the food that's laying on the bottom of that net builds a gas in that water, and the net kind of holds it in and can wipe them out. So what I use, those little hang-on back breeder boxes that has the air circulation all the time. For the first week or two, I'll put them in those. And the reason I do that is because I prefer to do a little bit of like a target feeding. The babies do better when they're in a smaller volume of water, getting the baby brine for the first few weeks till you build them up. And then from there, I'll put them into a 5 or 10 gallon, rear them up from there. I feed my babies 3 to 4 times a day. They get baby brine twice a day, and then I do crushed flakes and things of that nature. And like I said, I do really good water changes, and I mean they're a little bit more involved than most wide bearers, but they're not that difficult. There are some that are more, but the basic lines like the butterfly goodeids, doadroi, things like that. Those, I hate to use this term, but they're good beginner fish for people that want to try their luck with goodeids, and they're not that difficult to work with. Some of the goodeids have the behavior similar to a South American cichlid, and you have to learn how to work with those. But as for the breeding, one of the things I like to tell people too, people will go to these fish swaps and see these really big goodeids. Oh, that's cool, I want those. And take them home, and then they sit there and wait and wait and wait, and there's no babies. There's a reason why. If you want to breed goodeids, you want goodeids that are just starting to sex out at about 6 months. Generally, they'll start breeding I've had them start breeding at 6 months, but most of the time they generally start breeding at 8 to 10 months. You want them from that time till they're 2 years old. When they're at 2 years old, it's possible for them to still breed, but they're past their prime. So if you see these big goodeids and you think you're going, I've gone to some swaps where I've seen tequila split fins at full adult.
Uh-huh.
They're well over 2 years old, and people are buying and thinking they're going to, like, you're not going to breed goodeids past. All of my goodeids get retired at exactly 2 years old.
So they grow, a little slower than your typical live bear.
Yeah, they do. So prime example right now, the trout goodeids from the spawning you got from me. Mine are going on 2.5, maybe close to 3 inches now, and they were dropped last May. So how big are yours right now?
Yeah, they're probably a good. I mean, the bigger ones that you would send, because I got a kind of a mixed group, of
Yeah,
sizes.
I gave you some that were larger that I knew
But
for
yeah,
sure were males and females. So the thing to remember is how often you feed, your water changes and your water chemistry, and what type of food you're feeding.
but yeah, let's see here. I'm terrible at measurements, so I'm gonna look. Yeah, I would say the bigger ones that I have are a full 3 inches at least. Yeah.
Yeah. The trout goodeids tend to grow a little faster than some of the others.
Hmm.
Some of the ones that I feel tend to be a little slower growing are some of the Scyphia. But
Okay.
with what I'm doing now, without new food I'm trying that I was telling you about that I'm testing out, I'm seeing a big world of difference with my Scyphia. So
Okay.
Scyphia are herbivores, but they
Yep.
can eat an omnivore diet. But remember that they can't have too much protein. So they're similar to Malawi cichlids. You know how Malawi cichlids are prone to bloat if they get too much protein? It's the
Hmm.
same with Scyphia. So Scyphia need that nutritional fiber. So I'm developing a food right now. I have a source of raw kelp, and I dry it myself. I pulverize it into a flake, and I'm feeding that. And what I'm finding with that is, because I have control of how it's prepared, they're getting all the nutrients they need, they're getting the nutritional fiber, and I haven't had a fish die from bloat now since I started working with this food. So it also depends on what types of food you're feeding and how they're growing. So basically, there's no such thing as one catch-all food for goodeids.
Hmm.
Some are, all of them can do omnivore, but then you need to know if they need more vegetable or if they need more animal protein in their diet, and that just comes with a little research. And someone. One of the things I tell people is, if you really want to work with goodeids, find someone that can be a mentor. And I was very fortunate because Greg Sage was my mentor, and Greg was always there to help me. And because it's not just breeding these fish, there's a lot more that goes into it. There's a lot that goes into it more than with any critically endangered fish. It's not just producing the numbers. There's so much more to it.
Yeah, and that's I'm glad I got you to bounce all my questions off of, because it's kind of nice having that resource. It's
Yeah. Well,
it's great.
I think the first time I called you after you got your fish, I could hear in your voice you were kind of shocked that I reached out to you. But I
Well,
do.
it's not typical of, I guess, somebody that you get fish from, that they're following up with you and making sure everything's good. And
Well,
I liked it. It was definitely a pleasant surprise. Yeah.
for me, I I had my own store years ago. I knew what worked for my store. But another thing I tell people, I'm 54 years old. In the 70s and in the 80s, the aquarium, there were so many homes in the country, all over the world, that had aquariums. It was a thing to do for the whole family. Over the decades, our hobby is dying. And I feel a lot of that is because people are not getting the right information. And then what happens, because they don't get the right information, something happens where they fail, and then they're put off saying, this is too difficult. So one of the reasons I have the business I have is I love this hobby.
Hmm.
Um, this hobby has kept me sane, and I want to share it with people, and I want people to be able to enjoy it the way I did. I was very fortunate as a kid. I grew up on a farm. There weren't too many kids in my area, so my animals were, and I was taking care of my own aquariums, and I and I still have that love for it. And like for me, I'm 54 years old, and when I find a drop of fry, it's like I'm acting like I'm 5 years old. I still get excited. So for me, I want people to enjoy this hobby the way I do. And if I can, if doing stuff, making sure people have what they need to be successful, that's what I'm going to do. So when I send fish out to someone, I want to make sure that they understand what's going on. That's why I on my website, in order for you to order fish from me, you have to contact me. So it's not going to be like eBay or whatever, where you just click a button, you get the fish. I don't want a website like that. I want to have a conversation with people. I want to give them the information they need to be successful. And I think that's one of the things that lacks in the whole pet industry today is the lack of customer service. We've all gone to the point where the days of customer service, I go out of the way to treat people the way I want to be treated. And sometimes people look at me like I'm crazy. And I think some of us have just gotten so used to getting poor service that it's just become the norm. So that when they see me, they think, boy, this guy's over the top. I just want to make sure people, like when I knew how excited you were to get those trout goodeids.
Yeah, I've been wanting those for a while.
What kind of person would I be if I didn't set you up to succeed? And let's say within the first month, something would have happened that you lost those fish. I failed you, but I also failed those fish. I brought these fish into the world for a reason, and I have a responsibility to make sure they're taken care of to the best of the person's ability. And that's why I do. I'll and people that have purchased fish from me a year or two ago, I'll email them, hey, how was everything? There's another reason I do that, though. I'm collecting data. So I have a database. I keep track of what's going on. So let's say someone noticed something with a bloodline. If I see something tracking, so it's not me just selling fish. I'm building these bloodlines and strengthening them. So I collect that data. But another thing I do, there's some people, and I told you about this, that I work with that if, say, one of my bloodline.
Oh, Ed froze. Well, let's give him a second. Sometimes this happens with Ed.
There we go. I'm back.
There he goes. He's back.
Sorry about that. I
good?
live in the boonies. They have to pipe sunshine to me, so my internet stinks. So, but like I said, so that's why I do that, because it also benefits me and it benefits the work I'm doing, you know. And I know how I felt years ago when I was getting fish and I thought I knew how to take care of them, and something would happen, and then you start blaming yourself. And one of the things I find, we have to stop blaming ourselves if something happened that was an honest mistake. So I like to set people up to succeed. And that's why everyone gets my business card that has my email. And yes, you have my phone number too. And people are like, you're absolutely crazy. But I want to have that rapport with people. I want because I the day I called you, it was so funny. I knew immediately, this guy thinks I'm nuts. But to me, I have an actual business. So I have an LLC. So I have an actual business. So I want to make sure. So if I want my business to be successful, customer service makes that. But even if you're just a breeder, and even when I was just breeding fish and distributing and not a business, but just I wanted to make sure people enjoyed them. I didn't want to set them up for failure. So that's just part of what I do with them. And just understanding. So.
Okay. And I guess we kind of went off on a tangent there.
Yeah, sorry.
No, we're good.
Pull me back when you need to. Pull me back.
I'm all for it. So back to the breeding. Now they come out a bigger size. I can't remember if we touched base on that. What is the reason for that?
So the smaller number.
Your typical live bear, like a guppy, I mean, they can have upwards to 100 in a spawn. Right. and typically a lot smaller in size. So maybe that has something to do with it, the actual size of the fish, or is it the way they're birthed in general?
So, like I said, goodeids generally have 10, maybe 15. You will be amazed at how big the babies come out.
Yeah.
Generally, as a general, you'll sometimes have some do smaller. Generally, the average goodie baby on day one would be the size of maybe a 3 to 4 week old guppy. Able to take, let's say 3 weeks, 4 weeks maybe push, 3 week old guppy, and they can take baby brine shrimp from day one.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons I think this has happened is because these waterways these fish come from, they, I think this is just another added thing for them to help survive, that they're a little larger. Um, and like I said, with the amount, because there's not so many, that they have that room for that growth. But yeah, so I have, now what's really interesting is I have a species here, a bulldog goodid. When they come out, they're over a quarter of an inch at birth.
Oh, wow.
And the most I've ever seen them have that I've had is maybe 5 babies.
Uh-huh.
So I have friends that breed crocodons that sometimes they only get three babies in a drop. So that's the thing to remember if you're going to work with goodeids. They're not like guppies. Like you said, guppies can produce a lot of babies.
Mm-hmm.
Goodeids do not. They do small numbers. So I have a rare situation sometimes where I'll have one female drop 30 babies, but on average it's 10 to 15.
Yeah. Okay. Now the longer gestation period, does that play a role in baby size as
The
well?
longer gestation period is because of how the babies get the nutrients from the mother. Yep. And plus, the longer gestation period allows them to become a little bigger. So over evolution and time, this was the best way to give these babies a fair shake in the wild to survive. And another thing too, if the gestation period was sped up, think of the stress it would do on the female. It would take so much nutrient from her quickly, to their detriment. So that's the thing to remember is, where, like I said, with guppies, the baby is feeding off the inside of an egg, whereas with a goodid, they're feeding from the mother through a placenta and an umbilical cord from day one. So I think that's part of the process and reason why they do that is just to help sustain the female over time. And then also with larger babies, so to give them a better shake at surviving in the wild.
Okay, yeah, I guess I never thought about it like that. So like with a guppy, you got to condition the female to be, have enough energy to put that towards, making the eggs, and then kind of her work is done.
So with a live bear, so the thing is, so most live bears, you condition them that female ovulates. During that ovulation period, the chemical components inside the egg are the nutrients that feed the baby. Whereas with goodeids, the babies are, for lack of a better term, developing similar to like a fetus of a person. They're viviparous. So they're developing from day one and feeding from the mother. And as they get larger, they're taking more nutrient over time. Mm-hmm. So during the time that I know a female is gestating, I give her quality foods. I will sometimes increase the feedings too. I want to make sure she's getting what she needs and the babies are getting what they need.
All right. How, I guess, to touch on the last thing I want to do about the breeding is how quickly, when she's starting to drop, does she have the babies? I mean, is it one right after another, or is there
not always? No. I've had goodeids birthing for a couple hours.
Okay.
Generally, you will find the female will drop. Most of mine will drop late evening or early morning or in the night. If they're in an area of a lot of activity, they tend not to drop as easily. They'll wait until it's a little bit more quiet before they drop. Um, I have found they'll go into plants and hide, and if you're seeing that, and if you've seen their stomachs, their stomachs will literally square off like a box. You know they're about ready to drop.
Oh yeah. Okay. Now, I guess when it comes to keeping goodeids and their I guess not so common way of keeping them, what for people that want to keep them but maybe want them in like a community setting, what are some good options to pair with goodeids if you're not trying to do just species only?
I'm not a fan of that, especially with the critically endangered, but it can be done. And I tell people it can be done, but so generally like some tetras and things of that nature. But for me, I do species only tanks.
Yep.
But for someone who wants to do a community, it can be done. Most goodeids, you want to keep them with stuff that is not going to stress them out. So you definitely want to keep them with I wouldn't even keep them with a dwarf cichlid. I would do tetras, some barbs. Cories are good with them. But like you don't want to do things that are too active and are also going to compete a lot. If you have someone that's a Guanosaries, which is a cold tetra. Guanosaries get to be large tetras and tend to have voracious appetites. They're going to compete with goodeids. So you want to have fish that aren't going to compete, because what I have found with goodeids, if they have to compete for food, they're going to shy off and they're not going to get the nutrients they need. So you can do community tanks with them. Because of what I do with conservation and what I do with breeding programs and the organizations I work with, I do species only tanks. But like you did the trout with, help me out.
I've got the Gara Rufa in there.
You had them with the rainbow shiners, and they seem to be doing well.
Yeah, they did. They got along fine. I mean, it's not like they were schooling together. They had their own cliques, but everything was good.
But the rainbow shiners weren't out competing them, and they weren't stressing them out. So it was perfect for them. So as long as they're not, the species you're putting in is not out competing with them, generally you're okay. One thing to remember with goodeids, there are some species of goodeids that can be fin nippers. So it might not be the other fish you're putting in. It may be your goodeids nipping on your other fish. Trout goodeids can be nippers. Some of the xenotokas, like the doadroi, lion's eye, and izanai, can be nippers. So you just have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, because right now I just moved my trouts up to the new tank in the fish room. And I've got some Gara Rufa in there, so the doctor fish, another cold water fish. Kind of, they swim around the tank, but they're more of, kind of on the bottom, on the hardscapes kind of fish. And then I've got the black Venezuelans in there too, and it seems to be those are the only three species that are going. I kind of got the algae control done. I got the ground cleanup done, and then obviously the goodeids are all over that tank.
The only thing I would say is with the cories, if you wanted to breed the cories, you're probably not going to get successful spawns with them in a goodeid tank because of the higher pH. So one of the things when I breed cories, I flood the tank with RO, which gives it like a simulation of rain. You can't do that in a goodeid tank because that's going to crash and kill them. So if you want to just keep them in there as a cleanup crew, that will work.
Them again. Let's give him a second here.
What's that?
There he is. You're back. We lost you for a second.
Okay, so with the cories, as long as you don't want to try to breed them in the tank, if you just want to use them as a cleanup crew, you could do that. But if you wanted to breed those cories with the goodeids, that's not going to work because the goodeids need that higher pH and TDS.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds bad if I'm calling them a cleanup crew. They're in there to clean up, but I absolutely love the cories, and this tank's got a lot of plants in it, and I thought the black in specific was going to be really cool. Yeah. I'm a sucker for black fish, so
yep. So you got the black Venezuelan. What you get, the black?
Yeah, the black Venezuelans. I think they're black Schultz eye.
Yeah. So I have the
Same
orange
thing.
I have the orange Venezuelans here, and they're not producing for me. I'm
No.
wondering if they're not old enough yet. I'm not a fan of Corys. I mean, I like them, but I don't like to keep them. I have them
Yeah.
for breeding program now through my club that I'm doing for
All
the
right.
breeding program.
I don't want to interrupt you, Ed, but we're gonna have to end this stream. You don't like Corys? Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, it's all good. No, it's not that I don't like them. There is one I don't like. Pluckos are not my thing. They're too dirty.
Yeah. See,
But no, I want to have to send you some of my Napoensis Corys.
okay. Yeah.
I just got those confirmed. But hold on, what's his name? Rob McClure, who is a specialist with working with Corys. Because there are a lot of catfish being misclassified as Napoensis in the country that aren't. I've got the actual. And I've got wigglers right now. So if I'm able to rear some up, I'll send you some out your way.
Nice. Yeah, that'd be sweet.
So,
so I guess another thing, I guess, for people wanting to keep them in a community setup, I guess, would be to, obviously the harder water. And then you got to think about the temperature too. So they would have to be, a cooler water fish.
It's got to be fish that are going to work with those goodies. You certainly wouldn't want to put fish that require lower pH and higher temperature in with them. That's just not going to work. That's a recipe for disaster. But like when we were talking and you would ask about the rainbow shiners, that was perfect. They're a cold water fish and all that. So, and the water parameters are similar. So that was perfect. So it can be done.
Okay. Now, given, I guess, so everything we've talked about, kind of their, different way, the hell they have to have cold water. I guess what kind of struggles does that bring up when because you have your business and you ship these fish? How is that different from shipping other fish, if any differences?
So what I do a couple things, and it's been a process over a period of a few years of trial and error. So what I do, when the weather gets above 85 degrees, I put an ice pack in the box, and you saw how I do that. I have a gel that I freeze. It's wrapped around. My boxes are insulated with a styrofoam box. The inside has paper insulation to maintain that. But another thing that I do, because they're cold water fish, is I do not ship to your door. So I will ship to your local post office for you to pick up. Why do I not ship to your door? A few years ago, I had a customer that said they would be home to pick up the fish. They got called into work. I understand that happens. His fish sat outside in 90-degree weather out on his porch for 12 hours. He came home to dead fish. So the thing about it is I don't want the fish out in either extreme heat or extreme cold. So what I do is I make arrangements, you tell me. So I ship on Mondays and Tuesdays. You pick what day you want me to ship, and then I give you the time when it's going to be received. And then you go to the post office and pick it up. What I have found doing that practice ensures that your fish are going to arrive to you safely. So, and then I realize to some people that may be an inconvenience, but just from shipping these fish over the last 6 years, I have found this the best way to get them to you safely.
Okay. Now, with the Goodeids, there's a big, I guess, importance of keeping the strains true, and kind of having these, I guess knowing where they come from. So what we call that an ESU. Did you want to get into that a little bit?
Yeah. Before I get into this, I'm not preaching, I'm just teaching. So one of my big things with working with any critically endangered fish, not just a goodeiid, any critically endangered fish. When these fish were taken from the wild, these fish were not commercially caught and brought into the hobby. They were taken from the wild by field researchers. When these researchers collected these fish, they were given a label. It's called an ESU, okay? Evolutionary Standardized Units. And what that does, it literally gives all the information of where they were collected. It can go into where the time, a region, all of that, and the people that collected it. There's a reason for that. And the prime example is the Eisenite complex. So the Eisenite complex consists of any of the Xenotoca eiseni, Xenotoca doadrioi, and Xenotoca lionsii. Why is it important? Because up until 2016, those three species were considered one species. Through DNA sequencing, they found them to be three separate species. And what differentiated them? To look at them, they look exactly the same. What differentiates them is their ESU. That ESU is going to say exactly where they came from. So, lion's eye comes from Rio Tamazula, and there's one other location. What happened as these fish got isolated into these locations, over a sequence and period of time, they developed into a different species. They sprouted off and developed into a different species. So keeping those ESUs is important so that we are making sure we do not hybridize these fish. Now, at the beginning of the stream, someone had mentioned it seems like doadriois are producing a lot. And yeah, they're getting flooded into the hobby. So although I think it's great people are interested in these fish, I'm not thrilled that people are breeding these fish unconfirmed without ESUs. Because what's happening now, I work with the CARES program, and the CARES program works in conservation and collectively keeps a database of the people working with these fish in the country, and anyone who's interested can get involved. And over the last year, we've had numerous people trying to register these fish that had been hybridized. And I'm sure everyone can understand when you're working with a critically endangered fish that can become extinct, the last thing you want to do is hybridize them. So what I tell people, if you don't have an ESU for them, they're an aquarium strain. It's okay if you want to keep those fish in your tanks. I'm not going to tell people not to do it, but be transparent with them. Do not sell them as something that has an ESU. If you do not have an ESU, it's an aquarium strain. So if someone wants them just to have in their tank, that's fine. But for someone like me who works in conservation, maintaining these bloodlines pure, I won't bring an aquarium strain into my fish room. So my bloodlines of my fish come from 5 breeders in the country. That's it. And these 5 breeders come highly regarded, and I did research on them before I got them. So I'm not one of these people that just goes on to Aquabid and gets a species. Another thing that in my fish room I do, I have all of my fish confirmed. So my fish are confirmed true by Dr. John Lyons or Dr. Paul Loisel with the CARES program. And the reason I do that, I want to make sure what I'm producing is the true fish you would see in nature. And the reason I do that, because remember, if some of us want to get into conservation, we have 2 species we can use as an example that have been reintroduced back into the wild. If those fish were not, ESUs were not kept, and they were being bred into aquarium strains, it would be highly unlikely that researchers and scientists would reintroduce those fish back into the wild. And if something would happen like that, where there's no a particular species went extinct in the wild, and we couldn't pull from hobbyists and other labs and stuff, and that they didn't have ESUs, then that fish is lost. So what I basically just tell people is, in my opinion, if you're going to work conservation, there's no room for aquarium strain. You know, so, and with that, a lot of people I feel misunderstand some of us. Those of us that work with critically endangered fish, we get labeled as gatekeepers, naturalists, all of this. I'm happy to share the reason. I take that as a badge of honor, because it's not that I'm trying to single people out where they can't have these fish. There's a big responsibility working with these fish, and if we're going to maintain them for conservation reasons, we absolutely have to focus on what we're focusing on. So it's not like we're breeding a swordtail that we got from a fish farm in Florida. These fish were only brought into the country a few select times in small numbers, and now they're diminishing or gone in the wild. So we have to pick from those small amounts of that have been brought into our country. And if we just breed them willy nilly, we're basically putting another nail into the coffin for their extinction. So that's why I'm happy to share my information with people. I'm happy to help people. But if people want to call me a gatekeeper for that, then that's what it is, because I guess I'm a gatekeeper, because that's the mentality you have to working with critically endangered fish if you're going to maintain these bloodlines to true form and for conservation reasons. So for me, it's not just, oh, this fish is critically endangered, I'm just going to breed numbers of them like crazy. It's not just breeding numbers, it's maintaining the bloodlines pure and strong. And the ESUs help confirm that. So that's where all of that was coming from. So to confirm these fish with the CARES program, especially the eyes and eye complex, you have to have the ESU in order to confirm them. There's a couple fish here in the fish room that do not have ESUs, but they are not critically endangered. Every one of my critically endangered fish, whether they are a killifish, a cichlid, or a live bear, if they're critically endangered, I have an ESU for them.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, that's really all I have in my notes. I mean, if you wanted to touch on how we as hobbyists can make a difference keeping the goodeids, let's hear a little bit about that.
Sure. I've had people say to me, how can you say you're working conservation? You're breeding these fish in aquariums. And I understand some people feel they're not in the wild. That, I understand that. But like I've said, Scyphia francese. Scyphia francese went completely extinct in the wild when Dr. Miller went back in 1977. He couldn't find them anywhere. He brought some of them back. How these fish came back, they finally found some in a collection that no one knew that most people didn't know they had this. There was a private collector who was a hobbyist, just like all of us, that was keeping them, and he liked the fish and was keeping them, and he was keeping them true. So what happened? The researchers reached out to him when they found out he had these. They took some of those fish from him. They were kept in the lab. So here's the thing a lot of people don't understand. Let's say if Aqua Lab out of Jalisco, Mexico messaged me tomorrow and said, hey, Ed, we would like some of your Xenotoka lion's eye for reintroduction. They're not going to take my fish and put them back in the wild. They're going to take my fish to the lab. They're going to breed those fish, and the offspring from my fish will then be introduced in the wild. There's a reason why. There are some viruses that aquarium fish can pick up that can wipe out populations in the wild. So they need to make sure that those fish are healthy. So when people say, oh, you're not working conservation, you're just doing it for the aquarium hobby. We have two species, Zoogoneticus tequila and Scyphia francese, that have been reintroduced back into the wild. So when people say to me, as a hobbyist, can I really make a difference in conservation? Yes, you can. As long as you're following the protocol and maintaining them in true form, keeping as much data as you can with them, and doing the proper husbandry with them and keeping them true. Because if something happens, we have those fish to pull from. So that's the difference. It's not like, so what I tell people, working with critically endangered fish is not like working with ornamental fish. So, we as hobbyists have been working with ornamental fish for hundreds of years. Ornamental fish are bred for their beautiful colors, bred for long fins and things like that, for aesthetic reasons. There's nothing wrong with that. I enjoy a lot of ornamental fish. But the difference with working with critically endangered fish is you're not breeding these fish to create a new color or finnage. You're maintaining these bloodlines in their true form. So it's completely different. So I'll kind of volunteer this because when I was streaming recently with someone, I was asked the question, well, why aren't these fish more available commercially? I'm on the fence with that. And it's not that I feel that they shouldn't be offered to people. I feel should be a caveat. If retailers or commercial businesses are going to offer critically endangered fish, then they need to make sure that ESU is attached. Because when we're just continuing to perpetuate aquarium strain without that ESU, and I don't see very many, I've seen some people that are offering them that are commercial that aren't doing ESUs. You're not helping conservation. All you're doing now is breeding an unconfirmed fish. Over time, that floods and degrades the bloodline. So what I would say to like people who are in pet stores or people that offer commercially, I would say to you, if you want to do critically endangered fish, understand the importance of these ESUs and the difference of working with them compared to ornamental fish. Mm-hmm. So there are a couple people out there that are on YouTube and in the hobby that specialize in ornamental fish. And they say, oh, I can't sell goodeids because they don't have a lot of color. Well, you're comparing critically endangered fish to an ornamental fish. And the protocol and the outcome are two different ways. So ornamental fish, you're breeding for color and stuff like that. Wild fish, in my opinion, are beautiful the way, I love some of the colors the way they are. They may not be as colorful as some of the ornamental fish, but you're not breeding critically endangered fish for colors. You're breeding them for maintenance and conservation. So that's what I would tell people. Well, if you're comparing, goodeids to ornamental fish, of course, if your business is focused on ornamental fish, of course you're not going to sell a lot of goodeids because most people that come to you are looking for ornamental fish. Now, in my opinion, I have some fish, my Cracodon lateralis, as they mature, get a beautiful dark red. Mm-hmm. I prefer a naturally colored fish, but I also can appreciate, some of the ornamental strains. So just understanding that working with these fish, it's a completely different ballgame than the ornamental industry. So what I would respectfully ask anyone who wants to work with these fish is understand the importance of maintaining them true, maintaining all the data and information possible on them with the ESU, and sharing that information with everyone that you pass these fish along to. Because we don't want to continue to perpetuate unconfirmed fish that are just going to muddle down the bloodline and in the end may be part of the demise of the species. All right, well my soapbox moment is over.
Yeah, no, hey, that was well said, and it needs to be said.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm not being disrespectful at all to anyone in the hobby that's business or their fish room is focused on ornamental fish. There are a lot of people out there, good people, reputable, respectful people. But when they're asked, well, why don't you sell goodeids? Well, they don't sell for me. That's because you don't have the audience for critically endangered fish. Your audience, your customer base are people with ornamentals. So and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with anyone that enjoys ornamentals. I have no problem with that. But if someone would come to my fish room, if they think they're going to see these vibrant colors of like guppies and stuff, that's not going to happen here. You will see color. Now, we were talking, the Scyphia that you got from me, as they mature, the males get a beautiful yellow.
Oh, yeah, they're beautiful. Yellow, almost orange, the black spots. I mean, they're really pretty fish.
But you're not going to get like those. I want to try to find the best way to explain it. Where bettas have these blues, reds, all of that, you're not going to find this in wild fish. So you have to So if you're looking for something for color for your tank, I'll be the first to say you're probably not going to like goodeids. But my cracodons, like on my YouTube channel, I have videos of my cracodons. My cracodons are deep red. So there's always exceptions to the rule. But just remember that working with critically endangered fish is totally different than ornamentals. So that's one of the things I've just recently become a little bit more vocal with, because I certainly don't want to offend anyone, and I don't want anyone getting the wrong impression like I'm yeah, this is my way and this is the way you have to do it. It's very black and white when it comes to working with critically endangered fish. So, if you like ornamental fish, hey, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm going to use a line from Dr. Paul Loisel. He said if everyone in the aquarium hobby took one aquarium in their fish room or in their home and focused on one species of critically endangered fish, it would have a great phenomenal impact in conservation for critically endangered fish in the world. What a lot of people may not understand, 90% of our fresh water in the world is at critical mass. 90%. Every day we're putting more list of species into critically endangered, and every day we're losing numbers more and more of this. And people need to realize it's not just losing fish. So I'll use Mexico as an example. The Rio Tuxtlan. There are many small villages in that area. These folks need that waterway to live. The fish that are in that waterway are a link in the chain of that biotope. If these fish disappear, it's not just fish disappearing, it has a direct impact on that environment. Thus will also have an impact on the villagers. So one of the things now that programs like Shoals is doing is in empowering these villagers to take control over these waterways to sustain them for future generations, helping the ecosystem, but also helping them out too. So it's more than just a fish disappearing in the wild. When these fish are disappearing in the wild, whether they're in Mexico, whether they're in North America or whatever, when they're disappearing, it takes a big chunk out of an ecosystem, and over time, it degrades these ecosystems down. And that's one of the things we need to realize. And our fresh waterways in the world, 90% are at critical mass. So it's something we all need to understand. It's not just fish; it's maintaining these ecosystems, also for our future generations of our children, so that not just that there's a fish there, but also so there's clean drinking water, that there is a food source there for the people that need it and things. So it's so much more than that. So that's one of the things I tell people, and I kind of take a real broad stroke with what I look at with it with conservation. But it's so much more than just that. So what I tell people is, if you really want to make an impact and do something what I like about working with critically endangered fish, I don't just like with the aquarium hobby, like in YouTube, we have a community. I have a community like that with a lot of people that work with conservation and work with critically endangered fish. And what you will find, many of these people are eager and happy to help people. And if you really want to do something in the hobby that's going to have a direct impact on helping the future, I just think it's a really good way to help out.
All right. Well, why don't we take this time here to get to some of these questions that have been building up?
Sure. And hey, folks, I just want to let you know, he's going to have to read for me because my comments are so small, I can't read them. So I don't want anyone thinking I'm being disrespectful.
Yeah, we're good. So Shirley asked a while ago that if someone wanted to keep or breed goodeids, what works or what could work to be a good one to start with? And what's some good info about them that you don't usually see, like readily available?
Sure.
So go ahead.
Yeah, well, hi, Shirley. Thanks for that question. So there are a couple species that I feel are good to start out with. I hate to label them as beginners, but there are some that do better than others. So some of the ones that I would recommend to start out with first is Amica splendens, which is the butterfly goodeid. What's interesting about Amica splendens is that right now it's critically endangered. It's only left in 2 small bodies of water in Mexico now, and there's a good chance within the next few years they'll be completely extinct in the wild. Now, they're pretty popular in the hobby, but if you really want to work conservation, make sure your Amica splendens have that ESU. So like I have, and what I'm saying is find a breeder that's going to tell you where that fish comes from. So generally it's Rio Tuxtlan, which goes right off from Jalisco, Mexico. That's one of the areas that they come from. So if you wanted to work with them and keeping the bloodline true, you want to make sure you have that ESU. But Amica splendens is a good one. Any of the eyes and eye complex, which would be Xenotoka doadrioi, Xenotoka lion's eye, or eyes and eye. Those are good to start out with too. Those are good to start out with the base. And then if you enjoy, and I don't know, Brandon, did you get bit by the Goodeids bug?
I'm beginning to. Now that I've got these trouts up here in this bigger tank and I can actually watch them, they're a lot of fun to watch just because of their size. Not that the skiffy aren't fun. They're beautiful and they're, you know.
I got you. Now, so now the size. The trout Goodeids are a good one, but the trout get 5 inches long, big. Mm-hmm. They get 5 inches long. So that's one thing to remember is that they need a bigger volume of water. So as they mature out, I do them in a 55. I have a species of Goodeid that's known as the bulldog Goodeid, Allophorus robustus. When they mature out, they get 7 to 8 inches long. So as they mature, right now they're in a 75. As they mature out, I'm probably going to have to put them in a 150. So that's another thing to remember. So if size is an issue, a lot of people want to do Scyphias. Scyphias are good fish, but Scyphias require special diet. So I personally wouldn't recommend those as first times. But the butterfly Goodeid, the Xenotoka from the eyes and eye complex are good starters. And some of the eyes and eyes complex are colorful fish. Bright oranges, like intense, like light metallic blues. I mean, they're kind of hard to explain, but they're not just a plain little silver fish. My butterfly Goodeid, they're a silver fish, but the males have a canary yellow tail and striking markings. So some of the good starter fish are still a really cool fish to start out with. I would not recommend starting out with cracodons. I've been working with cracodons now for 3 years, and it takes time to understand those fish. So I wouldn't start out with them. But the 4 species I mentioned, I think would be really good to start with. And remember too, the husbandry and making sure you're feeding them properly. And what you'll find over time in your so what I'm finding with my eyes and eyes, my eyes and eyes were some of the first fish I brought into my fish room. Each generation, as they are born in your water, are adapting more to your water. You will see a transition in the color of the fish over time. So my eyes and eyes, my doadriois that I have, when I first got them, they had some color. But now that they've accustomed over generations with my water, I have, bright orange, blues. They acclimate slowly over time and present more of that natural color that they would have in the wild. And a lot of that also attributes with the water quality and also with their diet. But those would be the ones I'd recommend to start out with.
All right, Mike had a question or a comment. I've noticed that my lion's eye are breeding like crazy, but the gestation period is quite long. Is that typical of that species, or?
They can go up to 65 days, up to generally 45 that I've seen them. So what I have found happens if a female is stressed or there's a lot of activity in their environment, or if they're like, say you're keeping the aquarium in an active family room, that female will hold on to those babies. I've seen it happen. I have literally seen fish, females that have passed, and when I've cut them open to see what possibly could have happened, they had fully formed babies that they should have dropped. Over stress, they've held on to them. So generally with the gestation period, it can go up to 65 days. If your lions are producing, that's good. Right now, my guys, I'm having to pull from my friend who has a backup for me because my lion's eye stopped breeding prolifically about a year ago. And I have to reintroduce some new fish. It's from my bloodline. They're from one of my friends that got fish from me. but I use them as a resource if something happens. So another thing I do with breeding these fish, if you really want to breed these fish, don't put all of your fish in one tank. So my crocodons, I have 2 different species with 3 different locations. I have 12 tanks. So each location and species has 4 tanks. And the reason I do that is because I don't want to lose that bloodline. And I don't care how good of an aquarist you are or how long you've been doing this, things can happen where an entire tank crashes. So you don't want to have all those fish in one tank. So I build the numbers that way. And right now, my lion's eye were breeding prolifically. They've stopped. I get maybe 10 or 15 fry every few months now. So I'm having to rebuild that up. So with the lion's eye, if they're producing for you, you're giving them the right water conditions. If the gestation period seems to be a little longer, I would look into stressors for those females.
All right, the next one is from Nathan. He's wondering if temp plays a role in the ratio of male to female in the babies.
I've been looking into that. I have some fish that produce more females. I have some fish that produce more males. That's a good question. I sit back and wonder about that. But the interesting thing is, my fish room, that I don't heat my aquariums. I heat the room. And I heat my room to 74, which keeps my tanks at 72 to 73. My lower tanks go to about 71, but they're all within that ballpark. I have some fish that produce more females than males. I'm going to say it's possible, but I'm not 100% sure. But I've had an opinion that it's possible. But I think a lot of it too has to do with genes. I think some fish are more predisposed to male to female, just as people are. A family could have 8 kids and they'd be all females. A lot of it's through genetics and heredity, and I think that's some of it. But I also feel it's possible with temperature too. But I'm not 100% sure on that, so I'm not going to say definitively that that's the case. But I do have suspicion.
Okay, and then real quick, just one more fish wanted to know where you were from, Ed.
Where I'm from?
Yep.
So I'm 30 miles south of Pittsburgh. I'm literally 20 minutes from the West Virginia border. I lived in Pittsburgh for many years, and then I moved and bought a farm. And we live 30 miles south of Pittsburgh. So, and it's quiet here. I like it. But I've been here 4 years, and it was an opportunity to build the fish room the way I wanted to. But yeah, I'm 30 miles south of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania.
Then Stephen brings up a good topic that we didn't touch on. He was asking if it was mentioned yet if goodeids are good jumpers or not as far as coming out of the tanks.
They are. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. So one of the things that I have learned, and so my mentor is Greg Sage, and some of you may have heard of him. He has been working with Goodeids for many years, and he's well respected for the work he does with live bearers. One of the things he told me early on, Ed, do not put a glass lid on with them because they need that airflow. So what I do, let me get one so I can show you.
But yeah, if you guys got any questions for Ed, I'm able to look at the chat a lot easier right now.
So I don't even know what it's that art canvas that they do stitching with.
Like needlepoint meshes, I think because I have some too.
So what I do, I put this on the top of the tank. So it keeps the fish in so they don't jump out, but it's also giving you your airflow. These guys need airflow. And another thing too, in the home with that glass lid, you need to realize too, that holds in heat. So they need to have that airflow. They need to have that constant airflow, and they also need to maintain the temperature. And this will do it. And one time early on, I had completely forgotten him saying, don't do a glass lid. And I set up a tank with a glass lid, and I started losing fish, and it was predominantly in the summer. And then I remembered what happened. And since I've been using this, I have no issues. It also helps because you need to remember, too, there's going to be gas exchange in your water. If you have a glass lid this close up to the water surface, you're not getting that gas exchange the way you need to. These guys need really good gas exchange and oxygen exchange, and this is going to help.
Now, could you use egg crate as well?
Are you talking about that stuff like the plastic stuff that they use for lighting? You could use that, yeah. So anything that has holes to it that will hold them in, that's fairly rigid. Now this sheet that I have here, this isn't the normal one that you get at Michael's. This one here is way more rigid, so this doesn't bow into the tank. But what I do to be safe, I have supports that I cut out over the top and lay them on. But since I've been doing this, I get really good oxygen gas exchange and stuff, and my temperatures stay cool where they need to be. But yeah, he was 100% right with that, and I tell that to everyone. Yeah. You know that you definitely trout goodeids are notorious jumpers. Some of the others are notorious jumpers, but especially the larger ones like the trout goodeid, the bulldog goodeid, and stuff. You definitely want to end, but this is what I use because I want to make sure that I have that oxygen and gas exchange.
Now, Sleeper Barbecue, real quick, he's wondering how that stuff holds up to moisture. I'm guessing it's fine. I mean, it's plastic, so
it's plastic. And what I do with it, so if it starts getting, sometimes I'll get a little algae on them because I have, my lights are out right now, but I have full spectrum lighting on all my tanks. So I have, like, for me, with the plants I use, I have some tanks that are a little deep, so I need to have a high intensity light so that my plants are getting enough light. My lights come on for 8 to 10 hours a day, and sometimes I'll get a little algae on this. It wipes right off, so it holds up. It holds up to the moisture and stuff like that. And this just works for me, and I'm able to order like 30 sheets of it online. I think I paid $1 a sheet for this, and it's pretty big. It's almost, a sheet's almost 24 by 14. So, and then I just do the braces, and this holds up, so it gives that airflow. So that's the one thing you don't want to do glass lids with them, but you want to have something to hold them in so they don't jump out.
All right, now Nathan's got another question. He says, if we don't know where a type of goodeid actually came from originally, how important is that fish? He has Xenotoca eiseni, red-tail split fins, but they don't know the original point of collection.
So, what you have is an aquarium strain. As long as you're just breeding them for your hobby, as long as if you're not, and I'm not insinuating you would do this, but as long as if you're just breeding the fish for the hobby and you're not breeding them for people that like me, that let's use this as a prime example. So for me, I'm someone that works in conservation. So I'm not just breeding these fish to have in an aquarium. I'm breeding them to maintain the bloodlines true so that we can use them in the future should they go completely extinct in the wild. So we have a gene pool and a gene bank of fish that can be pulled for reintroduction. Without the ESU, without the location, those fish can't be used. So what I would say to you, I'm not saying to you to get rid of the fish. If you enjoy those fish, that's fine. Just be very transparent with people that these are an aquarium strain, I don't have the ESU. Now, if you wanted to register those fish with the CARES program, in order for the eiseni, so that's eiseni, doadroi, or lion's eye, in order for them to be registered and confirmed with CARES, you must have that ESU. So what I just tell people, there's nothing wrong with breeding these fish if you don't have the ESU. I'm not saying get rid of the fish. Just be transparent and say this is an aquarium strain. So you cannot guarantee that they're not hybridized because any of the eiseni complex look very similar. And Some of us can look at them and tell the difference, but an untrained eye with goodeids, they're all going to look the same. So then what happens if someone in conservation started breeding those fish thinking they were something they weren't? It muddles the bloodline and floods the program with conservation with unconfirmed fish that literally will destroy the bloodline over time. So just this last year with the CARES program, we've had numerous people register fish that they thought were true that were actually hybridized and that's why now we have to have the ESU. So for instance, for doadroi, to have doadroi confirmed, you have to have San Marcos. Predominantly, most of the doadroi came from San Marcos, that location. And like I said, these fish over time isolated in these areas and developed into their own new species. But if you look at them directly on, they almost look exactly alike. But they are different species. So in order to make sure you're not hybridizing, if you wanted to work with a type of program like I'm doing, you want to make sure those fish are not hybridized and that you have that information. So one of the things, and I don't mean to be disrespectful with anyone, that's why there are only 5 people in the country that I will consider getting fish from, because I want to make sure the fish I'm getting are the ones that are confirmed and working in the program and working for the reason I want to work with critically endangered fish. So all I would basically say to you is, if you enjoy breeding the fish, as long as you're telling people these are an aquarium strain, I don't see a problem with that. But if you wanted to work in a program where for conservation, keeping these bloodlines true, then you don't want to work with a fish like that. It's basically your choice. And that's what I tell people. I'm not one of these people, you have to do this, you have to do this. It's your choice. It's your hobby, it's your choice. All I say to people is, if you are going to breed an aquarium strain, just be very transparent with it. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Then Boots has a comment here. She says, I try to source fish from various parts of the country for variety in the gene pool for all my fish. Is this something you worry about with your goodeids, bringing in new fish?
Not at all. So one of the things I'd like to tell people, fish are not mammals. So bringing in new bloodline does not apply to fish. I will use something as a perfect example that any of you are more than welcome to, but I encourage you to research. The Xiphophorus breeding lab at Texas University, who works with Xiphophorus species. So they predominantly do all platies. Their bloodlines of their fish have been maintained in their lab for over 100 years. They've not reproduced. So the difference is, you can continue to perpetuate these bloodlines. What you need to do is proper culling. Okay, I have a bloodline here of fish that I've been working with now going on 7 years. Here's the thing to remember with goodeids. Goodeids weren't brought into the country like some swordtails or guppies or whatever. Some of these fish were only brought into the country maybe once or twice, and maybe only 20 or 30 of them. Okay? So these fish have perpetuated from these bloodlines. When one of the species isolates in a pool of water, how much of a gene pool do you think there is there? There's not. You're guaranteed over time to have that, if we want to call it, for lack of a better term, inbreeding. But fish are different than mammals. We know if we continue to perpetuate and inbreed mammals over time, we have congenital defects of these animals. That does not apply to fish. A prime example is, if you have a fish that starts showing a genetic defect, by culling those fish over time, it's going to take a couple of years. Over time, you will homogenize that line again back to where they need to be. I'll use one of mine as a perfect example, because with my business, I'm completely transparent. I have a bloodline of Francese. The first year I was working with them, they were throwing a lot of crooked spines. I stopped selling for 2 years and reworked that bloodline. Do you know how many, and now 4 years in, do you know how many crooked spines I get? 0. I did not introduce any new bloodline at all. What I did was cull over time. I called for quality. So that's another thing too. You want to look at these fish. If there's some sort of defect, a missing fin or a crooked spine, remove those fish. Don't breed them. If you want to call them humanely, of course, or keep them somewhere else, but don't allow these fish to breed. Part of the problem with a lot of people working with fish is not all people, but some people are breeding for quantity and not quality. If you have to understand, so if there's a fish is in one of these ponds that's the size of my living room, how much of the new bloodline do you think is being introduced regularly? So that's the prime reason to explain. So that respectfully, I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone, but reintroducing new bloodline does not apply to fish. Another thing to remember, just because you're getting, say you're getting crocodons, just because you're getting crocodons in California and then you get some in New York, there's a good chance they're related because the crocodons were only brought into this country a couple of times through researchers. So you're already blind breeding them in. You just want to watch and call them properly. So that's the difference. So I tell anyone, that does not apply to all the fish. And I have a friend that's a marine biologist that I'm actually going to be bringing in on my channel in a live stream, and he can get more in depth with that with someone if wanted to know. But that absolutely does not apply to fish at all. I can now if you want to bring a new part of bloodline in, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But like I said, you could bring crocodons in from California and crocodons from New York, and the chance of them being related is great because they've only been brought into the country a couple of times. It's not like some of these fish that we continue to collect over time come in droves. Scyphia francese, there were I don't have the exact number, but it was under 60. Under 60 were brought into the country. They were never brought in again. These fish are now being bred in numbers from those 65 fish back from the 70s. So it doesn't apply for that. You just want to watch for defects. You want to call it properly. So, but if you want to do that, I tell people, you do what you feel is right. You know, I'm not going to sit up in an ivory tower and dictate to people what they're doing, but that absolutely does not apply to fish. You just want to make sure you're calling properly. When I get up, so like Scyphia Lago de Camaquaro, that location no longer exists. That location was completely destroyed. You know why? Well, how it was destroyed? They covered that waterway over, small body of water over the farm end. So the Lago de Camaquaro is only available in people like me who work in conservation that have that bloodline. We can't pull from another resource anymore. These fish were only brought in for a certain amount of time. So what we have to do is call them properly and make sure that the fish we're rearing are of good quality. And when we see a defect, root it out immediately and don't allow it to continue to flood the bloodline. But yeah, I understand where a lot of people would feel that it's necessary to do that, but it really isn't. And what I would tell people, I understand if you don't believe me, I welcome people to do your own research. But like I said, in one of my first streams I'm going to be doing on my channel, I'm going to have my friend Rich Terrell, who's a marine biologist, and we're going to talk about stuff like that.
Awesome. So Shirley is saying that she wants to get into conservation. Her love is killifish, but she's been interested in goodeids. Doesn't know much about them. Obviously, until now, she knows all about them. But out of all your fish, which one is the most critical as far as conservation goes?
So, right now, Zoogeneticus tequila and Scyphia francese. Why? Because 5 years ago, they were completely extinct in the wild. They're doing well right now, but there's still that risk for them to bottom out again. After that, I would say my crocodons. And what's happening with the crocodons? So I have a location of crocodons. Crocodon Audax Los Pinos. They've now just been put into a special breeding program with the Goodeid Working Group. Their numbers are dwindling. And the thing about with them is they only have so many babies at a time too. So there's quite a few, but my favorites are my If you had to ask me what my favorite is, my favorite are the crocodons. And what I like about the crocodons, they're a small fish. They get to be about 2.5 inches. Some of them have some really nice coloration to them, and their behaviors are similar to South American cichlids. So what I tell people is, like Shirley, like I said, what I would recommend, starting out with a fish that, for a lack of a better term, are good starters, like the species I told you, Amicus splendens and any of the Isonite complex. And once you get comfortable with them, going into something new. But definitely, crocodons are not for everyone. But the thing to remember, the Amicus splendens, the butterfly goodeid, that seems to be the easiest to obtain within the hobby, within the next 2 years is probably going to be extinct in the wild. So I would tell people, if you can get your hands on a confirmed bloodline of these fish, get them. Now, when I mean confirmed bloodline, that means they have been registered and confirmed through the CARES program through Dr. Paul Loisel or Dr. John Lyons. So any of my critically endangered fish in my fish room have gone through that process, and I have a certificate. For a lack of a better term, for those people that understand AKC registered dogs and maintaining those bloodlines, this is similar. And the importance of having them confirmed through the CARES program is Dr. John Lyons focuses and specializes in goodeids and other critically endangered live bears. Dr. Paul Loisel specializes in tetras, killies, and cichlids. And we have Dr. Mickey Tobler, who specializes along with them too. So what it is, any fish that I get that comes into my fish room, I have all of them confirmed, and I have their certificates, and I've had their certificates made into a PDF file. So what I'm doing this year, just to kind of talk the talk and walk the walk with what I'm saying, when you buy critically endangered fish from me, I send you a copy of that PDF file. So then if you choose to keep the registration on these fish, which I hope people would, it has that information there. You can get it confirmed, and then your fish will be confirmed. And it continues that. And the importance of that is making sure these fish are their bloodlines are staying true and we're not hybridizing them. So probably, honestly, Shirley, I would say start out with Amicus splendens or any of the Isonite complex. But if you really want to work into the conservation aspect of it, make sure you're getting fish that have been confirmed with their ESUs.
So that would probably answer Nathan's next question, which is, does anyone recall if or what was said about the Amicus splendens status? Is it endangered, etc.?
Amicus splendens right now is critically endangered, on the verge of extinction within the next 2 years. Amicus splendens used to be it had a vast expansion within central Mexico. They're now down to 2 small waterways. So one of the things I tell people, I'm involved with a couple organizations that focus with the conservation of these fish. So I'm a member of the Goodeid working group, and it's a good resource. People that really focus on conservation. And the gentleman who started the group actually works at Aqualab in Jalisco, Mexico. He goes out and does research, and every 3 months I get an update on the waterways. I get pictures, I get articles, updates, and all the data from his research. And anyone can be a member of the Goodeid working group and get that information. But Amicus splendens, it's looking like within the next few years, Amicus splendens will be completely extinct in the wild. With that being said, right now in the hobby, there are a lot of people producing Amicus splendens that are not confirmed and don't have ESUs. If we continue to perpetuate those bloodlines and we diminish those bloodlines over time where we no longer have an ESU for the Amicus splendens and we don't have confirmed fish, if Amicus splendens goes extinct in the wild, guess what? They're now extinct all the way. That's the importance of keeping ESUs.
All right. Zen has a question about the trout goodeids. She has some from the Greg Sage line that were kept by 2 other hobbyists that both kept them species only, but doesn't have any official information per se as far as where they're from. She's just wondering if she should not distribute them.
So Zen, so remember when I said a little while ago, I have a couple fish that are of least concern by the International Union of Conservation. Trout goodeids are one of them. Trout goodeids are not a critically endangered fish. Mine do not have an ESU. Now, if it came to the point where every critically endangered fish I have in my fish room, I have an ESU. I have 2 species of fish in my fish room that I do not have an ESU, and the trout goodeids are one of them. But both of those species are not critically endangered fish. So at this point in time, enjoy them, breed them, you're fine. It doesn't kind of fall into play with critically endangered fish. But if the time came where trout goodeids became critically endangered, I would stop breeding this line altogether. And if I didn't find an ESU line, I would stop breeding them altogether. But for right now, they're on the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is ICUN. You can go on their website and you can see what fish are critically endangered and whatever. Trout goodeids are on the list for least concern. So for right now, I appreciate that question. That's not going to apply to them. So for them, although they are a wild native species, they're not critically endangered. So at this point, if you had an ESU, if someone has an ESU, reach out to me, because I'd much rather have them with an ESU. But the fact that they're not a critically endangered fish, you don't really have to worry about that right now. And I'll tell you what, they're a popular fish. They're one of my most popular fish. And what I just tell people, they're not. A lot of people have the misconception they're a critically endangered fish. They're not. So I'm not saying if you have an ESU, you don't have to worry about it. If you have the ESU, by all means, keep it. But if you don't have an ESU, you're not doing any harm like what you would be doing with critically endangered fish.
Audra's got a question about, should you ever encounter illness, are the typical meds available to us okay to use on Goodeids, or they need special medication, or are the standard meds fine to use?
The standard meds, but I've been in this hobby for years. To give you a little bit more of a background with me, I have a degree in healthcare. I'm a licensed registered nurse. I also have a minor in biology. So I have opinions about medications. I use medications as a last resort. I don't believe in just immediately treating a fish. So the first thing I do with any fish that I think is showing signs of stress, the number one thing I use is salt. And then I go from there. But if you're having serious issues like a bacterial infection or something like that, yeah, the basic medications will work. What I always tell people to remember when you're using medications, you want to take the carbon out of your water, because the carbon will pull that medication out. Follow the directions. The thing to remember, let's say if your goodeids get ick. Now remember, treating ick, you're going to use your medication, and generally you up the temperature of the water because that speeds up the cyst cycle. Remember, goodeids can't have a high temperature. So it may take a little longer to do that process with them. What I have found, if you're maintaining a constant temperature, as long as you have a constant temperature and you're doing your husbandry and good water quality, rarely do you have an issue. One of the things I tell people too, and I'm actually going to do a video on this pretty soon, when you're bringing fish into your fish room, isolate them. Now, on my fish room, I have a closed fish room. I don't have new fish coming in and out. But I still tell everyone, you should quarantine my fish too. Because when I'm shipping you those fish, it's very stressful. Stress can drop their immune system to where they can be susceptible to disease. So any fish you get from anyone, even your best friend, you should isolate those fish for a minimum of 3 to 4 weeks before introducing them in your new tanks. So generally when I'm isolating fish, and I isolate fish that I've gotten from best friends from years. When I isolate for 3 to 4 weeks and I monitor them, and I do a dose of salt with them. And the reason I do a dose of salt with them, salt helps with their respiratory system, boosts their immune system, and helps their slime level. So generally, if they look a little off, that will flush all of that out. And then after that, I will go into the meds. So when some people, when you see these folks that are immediately isolating fish and then bombarding them with these medications, I'm not convinced with that. Those medications, if you're treating fish needlessly, with medications, especially medications that are antibiotic. If you're treating them over time with something needlessly, there is a chance that they can become resistant to that. But yeah, as a general rule of thumb, the same medications work. I just tell people, be mindful of how you're treating, and just realize that because they're cold water fish, it's going to take a little longer time to treat the process.
That is a good point. I would have never thought about that. Yeah.
So I'll share something. Okay, so I had my own pet store for years, and right now I'm on hiatus from my job, so I'm helping my friend at her store. Okay, so one of my, I don't want to say pet peeves, but something that really gets me. People will come into a pet store. Any pet, it could be any pet store, it could be a mom and pop shop, it could be one of the big retail pets, any of them. They buy fish and immediately throw them in their tank at home without isolation. But then if something happens, you killed my fish. No, I didn't. You know, anything can happen. So like prime example, at the stores I work, when I net fish for you, I don't just put them in the bag. I show them to you first. I want you to see the fish you're getting. We inspect them. Okay. You have to remember, transporting fish is stressful. Whether you're just going across the neighborhood or across the country, it's stressful. It lowers their immune system and then makes them susceptible to disease. So here's a prime example. My crocodons, I have a small fortune in my bloodlines of crocodons. I'm not going to take the risk of bringing in a fish and throwing it in with those crocodons. I'm going to isolate them. If you're not, any fish you get, you should be isolating. So that falls into place with them with the disease too. So stress brings on disease. If a fish gets stressed, they're open for disease. It drops their immune system. Transporting fish, like I said, be it just an hour or a couple of days, is stressful. And you need to take the steps to make sure when you're bringing them home that you have them where you can monitor them for a few weeks before putting them into your main tank. And so when people say, "Oh, you killed my fish," how did I kill your fish? The fish I sold you at the time I showed were perfectly fine, but with stress, things like it can be triggered on by stress. If you're throwing these fish into your tank, you're choosing to put fish that you don't know the background over the last few weeks of what's happened with them. A lot of stores, one thing that I respect with Aquarium Co-op, one thing that I really respect with Corey with Aquarium Co-op, he has an area in his store that he isolates fish for a few weeks. I really respect that. Most stores can't do that. They don't have the space for that. So, and you know, it's just the nature of the beast in the pet stores. So there's a lot of pet stores, they're getting fish in and selling them the same day. Well, they have to because they don't have the space to monitor that. So you have to remember, some of these fish are coming in from fish farms, or they're coming in from importers, and they may have only been here for a few short days. Things can be incubating in these fish, so you want to isolate them. You don't want to put them in with your population that's doing well, and you need to isolate them. So that's one of the things that kind of ties in with the illness, is isolating them and stuff like that. So I just wanted to touch base on that when she was talking about it.
Zen has a question going back to the lids. She says she has her glass lids on, but she doesn't keep the little, like the 2-3 inch plastic back piece on there.
Right.
And she leaves the water level down about 3 inches. She's just wondering if that's fine.
So you're going to get you're going to get the gas exchange. But here's the thing to remember: when it gets really warm in the summer, monitor your heat, because that glass is going to hold in heat. As long as your water parameters are staying within the right temperature, you should be fine. My place. So I have a climate controlled fish room. So I have full air conditioning when I need to in the hot weather, full heat in the cold, and I maintain these temperatures. And stuff. If you don't have that type of luxury, you just want to make sure that your temperatures are staying within the parameters. So if you're using a glass lid and you've got that ventilation and you've got that space for gas exchange, as long as that temperature is staying within range, you're fine. It's just easier for me to do the lids I do because I have 110 aquariums. And then that's something that works for me where I'm getting really good ventilation.
Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Next one would be Boots wants to know, how do we know we're buying Goodeids with ESUs attached to them? Like, for example, do they come with papers?
So that's what I'm going to be. That's something I'm taking an initiative to do this year. So what you can do is you want to, let's just be honest with you. You want to find a reputable. If you really want to get into conservation, you want to find a reputable source. So what you do is you get involved with the groups and the organizations that focus on these, and ask them if they know someone you can refer to. Okay, that's what I did when I first started out. Okay, so like I said, I have five people in the country that I will even consider getting fish from because I know their protocol and I know they're breeding what they're saying they're breeding. So when you get a fish, it should have a location and some other sequence of numbers. If you just have the name of a species and that's it, you can't confirm that fish. So what you have to do is my crocodons. I have two different locations for a species crocodon audax. I have crocodon audax El Tabaso, Durango, Mexico. So if you want to confirm that fish with the ESU, you don't just want to have crocodon audax. You want to have El Tabaso. As long as you have El Tabaso, it's good. But if you have El Tabaso, Durango, Mexico, you want stuff like that. If there's a series of letters, so my robustus, my bulldog Goodeid, I have it right here. This is a post-it note. I don't know if you guys can see. I wanted to show. There's writing from the top to the back. This is the ESU for that fish. I can go on Google Maps, put in this location map, and Google will pull up the exact location those fish came from. I have the date, I have the collection of who collected them, what doctor did on the date and all of that. In the databases with these groups, I have this information. I can put that in some, like this particular, now this one's an extensive ESU. Most of mine I don't have this, but I was fortunate with this that I have this ESU. I can go into programs with the Goodeids working group, give them this information, and they have within their database, they can give me the information, who collected it, what day, a year, all of that. You can also go on Google's Maps and do the longitude and latitude and get that. Now, again, this is an extensive ESU. The others, there's others, as long as you have a location that can be confirmed that's the location they would come from. And then going through the CARES program to have them certified as a true strain through Dr. Loisel or Dr. Lyons, and they're certified, then you're good. But the thing about it is, I don't mean to be disrespectful, let's be honest. A lot of people are circulating this fish without this information. And that basically, without that information, they're an aquarium strain. And if you really want to work with these bloodlines, keeping them true for conservation, you can't use aquarium strain. But I will reiterate, if people work with the aquarium as strain, and as long as they're transparent and telling people this is an aquarium strain, I find no problem with it. It's just when people try to pass them off as something they're not, because then that hurts the bloodlines of these fish over time, and it goes against conservation. So there's the steps for that, but this was right here in front of me, so this was a perfect example. And like I said, literally the ESU for this species starts at the top of this post-it note. And I don't know if you can even see the writing because it's glary from
Not really.
But literally, this is a regular size post-it note, and I have to enter it in my data bank. Literally, it's 2 pages. That's the ESU, and I can literally go into Google Maps, pinpoint it, it'll show me the area where they were collected. I can go to the Goodeids working group, go into their database. I know who collected it, what doctor collected it, on what research study they did, the date, and all of that. So that's the importance of these ESUs.
Now, does it say what that doctor had for lunch that day?
You never know. But that's the difference. So if Robustus is a critically endangered fish, let's say 5 years down the road, the bulldog goodeid becomes completely extinct in the wild. They're going to look for lines like this that have this information, because they're going to know that area that either dried up and then we want to repopulate, we brought it back, we've restored that waterway, we want the fish from that area, here it is. That's the difference. They're not going to grab a fish that doesn't have that ESU for reintroduction. So this is the perfect example of why an ESU is important. Mm-hmm. And it's just it's up to each individual. If you want to work on the conservation side, which honestly I hope most of you will, because it's my passion, and I mean I find it rewarding. But if you just want to work with fish for aquarium, there's nothing wrong with that either, as long as you're being transparent about it.
Okay. Kyle seems to think he ate Taco Bell.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
So Kyle seems to think that scientist ate Taco Bell that day. I'm thinking there's no Taco Bell in Mexico. I feel like that would be that wouldn't be good.
I like to call Taco Bell toxic hell.
So that brings up Kyle's question. He's wondering if there's any miraculous stories of people, going to a construction project where they're going to say, cover this body of water with land like they did, you had mentioned earlier, and, saved fish ever. No?
So when Del Lago Camacuaro was extirpated, farming is a way of life in Mexico. It is how these people make a living. So what happened? They just covered over the waterway. Okay. And the thing about it is there has to be a balance. We of course want people to have food to take care of their people, but at the same time too, we want to preserve the nature of the area and the ecosystems. So programs like Shoals now empower these people and show them the importance of that, so that things like this don't continue. So we're working hand in hand with villages and the people of Mexico, but it's happening. It's literally happening all over the world, where waterways are being destroyed. At the risk of sounding like a weirdo, man is his own worst enemy, and we destroy nature daily. And so that's the difference. So the thing about it is now with Del Lago Camacuaro, they only exist through people like me. You will never find one in the wild. If they ever wanted to reintroduce again, what would have to happen? That location would have to be brought back to its natural form with a stabilized waterway to introduce those in. But for now, they just exist. I have a few friends that are working with them. We're keeping those bloodlines clean. If they were ever to decide to restore that area, we have the bloodlines that could be reintroduced back. Just like Kyle, your tequila, you know the story about the tequila. I recommend anyone get the information and read about the restoration project with tequila. It's an amazing story of how it happened. And like I said, it's proof that there's good that comes out of the conservation aspect of the reintroduction.
That's actually SC's question. They were wondering if the tequilas had an ESU, if you want to tie that in with what you're talking about now.
So ESO, Schiffia Francese and Zoogeneticus tequila predominantly come from the Rio touchline. So as long as if you have that data and you can have them confirm that, yes, that's that species, you're golden. I don't know of too many people that have the full sequence of an ESU with the tequila like I have with the bulldog. But as long as you have real touchline beside them, and then you can have a professional confirm that food, like, so the one thing I tell people about the CARES program, look at it this way. You have someone who specializes and researches and has worked with these animals for years, confirming to you, yes, this is what this animal is. So just by doing that alone it's going to help, like I said, like with an AKC registered dog, for lack of a better term. But what I'm doing, and I had talked to you and Kyle about this a few months ago, and I'm putting it into effect this year. All of my bloodlines are confirmed. Okay, so I have my certificates of confirmation. I have the days they were confirmed, which doctor confirmed them. I'm keeping that information, and I do it in a PDF file. So when, and I'm finishing up a few more bloodlines that I have to, and I have to get yours to you. But what will happen when you buy, and before I even say this, I'm not implying that everyone needs to buy fish from me. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm doing to take it a step further is, if you buy fish from me that are a critically endangered fish and I have an ESU, I'm going to send you a digital copy of my certificate that shows the confirmation. For lack of a better term, you know how people who collect dolls and they get those certificates of authenticity? That's what you're getting with me. And what I'm hoping is that it sets up a chain reaction where more people do that. Because if you want to focus on the conservation aspect of it, that's what needs to be done. And I would hope most people would just do that to maintain these bloodlines. So, and it's not that difficult to register the fish. It'll take you less than 10 minutes to register them. You register the fish through the CARES website, www.caresforfish.org. I'm actually a speaker for the CARES program. I teach seminars to clubs and things like that, and do talks at universities and stuff on the CARES program. And then anyone can become a member of CARES. You can either be you can either have your club, fish club, or you can do an individual. And then you register your fish. It'll take you 10 minutes to submit your information, and then you also have to have pictures sent. They don't have to be, magazine worthy, but they have to be decent, clear pictures you send with them, and then they'll send you a confirmation back with an email. And then after that, I do it every quarter, but as long as you're doing it a couple of times a year, updating they'll ask you to update on your species. So let's say you have Zoogoneticus tequila, and over the last year they've dropped two sets of fry. You'd say, yeah, they've dropped this. You just give them a little update, and they keep that information. Now, the one thing a lot of people, which I hoped in the future would change, they keep a database to know where these fish are, but most people are not sharing the database for someone looking for fish. And there's a reason why. A lot of people get into the program, they're all gung-ho, but they don't update their information. So as the chairs of the organization feel, which I agree, they don't want to have a database that's out of date all the time. So what we do is we're generally keeping the data of the people that are really committed to the program. What we find is a lot of people will register their fish and then they drop off. So what we're doing is we're maintaining that information for us. And then like people that want to say, you have the option that, hey, you know what, if someone's looking, you're welcome. We don't share that information with anyone. It's up to the individual. But like, say if you wanted to go onto a website and look at a database, that's not happening. And part of that is because maintaining an up-to-date functional database that way is very difficult. So right now we're keeping a database, have a general idea of where most of these fish are in the country. So what I tell people, the importance of the program is, if you really want to make sure that your bloodlines are true and pure, it's a perfect avenue for doing it. And like I said, it only takes maybe 10 minutes to register a fish.
Sleeper Barbecue's asking, when you say they're extinct, is that one waterway in Mexico or all waterways? And I think we touched base on this.
Scyphia francese was completely extinct. Scyphia francese comes from two waterways, Rio Tuchlan and Saola. They were completely gone. Zoogoneticus tequila came from Rio Tuchlan, were completely gone. So when we say extinct in the wild, that's exactly what it means. They are gone from the wild. Right now, there's a bloodline I'm working with, Cracodon audax Los Pinos. There's down to 3 small micro-endemic locations now in the waterways that are dwindling. They're probably going to be gone within the next few years, and that's why the Goodeid Working Group initiated a special breeding program that we're working with these fish now, so that if possible reintroduction is possible, we will have bloodline to reintroduce. So when they are extinct in the wild, that is it's not just a waterway; they are gone. Some of these fish come from a couple different waterways. If they're extinct in the wild, it's from all of them. But like I've said, the big issue with these waterways is contamination and invasive species. So right now, the number one invasive species is having a direct impact is tilapia. But there's also a couple other species, and people find this hard to believe. Xiphophorus, platies, and swordtails are competing for the food for these of the goodeids, and the numbers of the goodeids are dwindling. People have released tilapia and these Xiphophorus into the waterways, or they've gotten loose from farming the tilapia from aquaculture. These are having a direct impact. Also, farming, pesticides, runoff, stuff like. So there's a lot of things coming into place. But right now, the big impact we're finding is the drought. Mm-hmm. Last year, there were a couple waterways, and please forgive me, I don't have the names for them right now, and I don't want to give the wrong information. And one of the last newsletters we received from the Goodeid Working Group, last year there were 2 waterways near the Rio Touchland that were thriving. Today, one's completely bone dry, the other one is just a mud pool. Everything that was living in it is now gone. So that's why it's important to do this. Like I've said, I'll reiterate again, a lot of these waterways may be the size of your living room. So they're not as stable as like a big river or things of that nature. So that's why it's important that we understand these microendemic climates, these microendemic locations. We really have to be cautious and conscious of what's happening with them.
So that would tie in with our last question. It's Sleeper Barbecue again. He's asking if you are breeding them to one day be returned to the wild.
I
think that's exactly why you're doing what you're doing. Yep.
I am. So like I said to people I'll reiterate too. So if Aqualab were not, I know the director of Aqualab. He knows what I'm keeping. He knows my stuff is true. I'm not saying he ever would, but he may call me one day and say, "Hey Ed, I know you have this bloodline of fish. I know it's confirmed. Would you donate some for it?" And I would absolutely do that. Now those fish I would donate, my fish are not going to go back into the wild. They would go to the labs and they would breed them. The offspring would be tested, and the reason why is because aquarium strain fish can harbor viruses that, if introduced in the wild, could wipe out an entire population within an area. So they test to make sure they're free of the viruses. So I'll use Zoogeneticus tequila as an example. They pulled tequilas from a couple collections. They were taken to Aqualab where they were bred out. They bred numbers of these fish over a period of a few years. They then took those fish that were bred out. They have a waterway, a contained waterway right outside of the lab. Those fish were introduced into that contained waterway. They monitored them for almost another year. They were doing well. And then they were slowly reintroduced back into the wild. So that's the process. So it's absolutely possible, if you're working with these groups and these organizations and you have confirmed bloodlines, it's possible that they could reach out to you in the future if something became extinct or something at critical mass that they need to reintroduce. And that's why it's so important to keep these ESUs.
All right. Well, we are through all the questions, and I believe we've hit on pretty much everything that I could think of. Is there anything else you'd like to address, Ed? Anything you can think of?
Yeah. Just for me, if anyone has any questions, I'm a big geek about this. I can talk about this all day. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. So you can reach me through my YouTube channel, Ed's Aquatic Exotics. You can reach me through the Facebook page, my business page, Ed's Aquatic Exotics, or you can email me directly through my website at Ed's Aquatic Exotics. I'm happy to help you. This man right in front of you can tell you, yeah. I check in all the time on how the fish are doing. I want to make sure people are enjoying their hobby, and I'm making sure that, I'm giving them the best information possible. And I walk the walk and I talk the talk. So I'm an open book, and I'm happy to help anyone.
Yeah. Well, Ed, I think we're going to wrap this one up then. I want to thank you for coming on and doing this with me. You know, like I said, it's kind of my first real live stream I've done, and it. You know, I'm glad it was you. I'm real comfortable talking to you, so that helped a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we hit on a lot of good talking points this stream. So
Yeah, you know, one of the things I found, and this is an honest critique. You'll see a lot of videos on YouTube about critically endangered fish, and I think it's great that people are sharing that, but you're not getting the nuts and bolts of taking care of them. You're not getting the nuts and bolts of the husbandry, the water parameters, the diet. If you wanted to breed them, what do you need to do? So that's the goal of my channel. I want to be an informational source for people that really want to learn about these animals.
all right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out and hanging in there. It was kind of a long one. What are we at? 2 hours and 20 minutes. So
I know. I'm thinking I'm down to 20% on my phone.
yeah. Well, I'm gonna end it, and Ed, if you want to stay on, we'll talk backstage for a second. And
Sure.
again, thank you guys for coming out and hanging out, and I appreciate the support. And I'll talk to you guys later.
Take care, everyone.